Visionaries Global Media, your number one source for podcasting entertainment.
All right, this is a different episode of MGB. I'm doing the introduction this week, Mason. All right, we've got a very special guest with us. We've got Derek Bish from England. He's a newspaper reporter for the Express and Star in Wolverhampton. I think this is actually the first former student that's been on MGB as well. And that, of course, is why I'm doing the interview. How are you doing today, Derek?
I'm good, thank you very much. I'm good.
Now, I mentioned the Express and Star. I know you work for another newspaper as well. I didn't put that one down specifically. Now, I wanted one question straight away. Do you know the Iron Serb?
Yes, I do know the Iron Serb. He, when we're in the office, as we're not at the moment, he works about 25 feet behind me to my left, which is always a little bit disconcerting. So just in case he puts me in a sleeper hold at any moment. But he's generally a bit of a pussycat around the office. So,
and the reason I asked, I said, you're the first former student. You're not the first person from the Express and Star. We had James Vukmirovic. Actually, we had him for 2 episodes. We got started talking, and then we didn't shut up for about 2.5 hours. We had a good old natter on that. So, yeah, when I saw that, I was like, oh, that's the same newspaper as Derek. So I figured I had to ask you that question. Now, like I said, I normally let Mason introduce the guests, but with you being my former student, I had to do the maths on this. It's nearly 20 years ago. That can't be right, can it?
Yeah, it's goodness me. So I left school in 2004, and I think you were my maths teacher the year before that. So yeah, about 17 years now.
Oh so gosh, that's a long time ago. And we have another connection as well. We were former teammates on a football team or soccer team for our American audience, Wakes. And I'm sure I got a question coming up about that a little bit later as well. Now, this interview came about actually from a comment I think we saw on Facebook about a year ago. And we kind of touched base with you about it. And then, I don't know what happened. We kind of forgot about it, and then suddenly it came up again, and we're like, oh, we definitely need to talk to Derek about this one. Now, before we get to that, let's get to some background questions. So, Mason, do you want to start us off?
When did you get into wrestling, and what are your favorite memories as a fan?
Oh, wrestling. When did I get into wrestling? So I think I first heard my friends talking about wrestling when I lived in Essex, which was around about sort of 98, 90, 99. And then I only really started properly getting into it when Channel 4 over here started showing some of the big pay-per-views live in the middle of the nights. I think that was the year 2000. So that's the year 2000 to me is sort of my mecca year. It is. I love the year 2000. Royal Rumble 2000, Backlash 2000, 2 of my all-time favorite pay-per-views. And it just sort of went from there, and I fall in love. I come and go between different organisations and that. But you know, I sort of dropped out just after. But I think it was just around about the time Kurt Angle was leaving WWE to go to TNA. But then I didn't really get into TNA until I was flicking through the channels one day and come across on Challenge, one of the more obscure channels we've got over here on Freeview, which usually shows reruns of old British game shows, which was right up my street. And I'd said, oh, what's this? TNA Impact Wrestling. And I was thrown straight into the midst of, I think it was the Bobby Roode, James Storm feud at the time, and which was brilliant. So that got me right back into that. And there were some of my old favourites like Kurt Angle and love Jeff Hardy. So so it sort of sucked me back in from there, really.
We have a lot of parallels there. 2000 was when I first moved to the States. When I taught you was when I moved back actually from North Carolina, and that's exactly when I got into it as well. So 2000 for me is that key year. And similar thing, when he started watching WWE, I was flicking through the channels one day, and I was like, whoa, what's that 6-sided ring? That's actually kind of what got us into it a little bit more as well, because that was the new thing for me. I'd never seen that before. I'd never seen TNA at all, or Impact as I think it was called then. I know they keep changing their name, but yeah, a lot of parallels with what you're saying there.
What wrestling are you watching currently?
I'm keeping a little bit up to date on WWE, not so much at the moment. I've been sort of dipping into AEW a little bit. Whereas we've been getting some highlights on ITV over here, which is quite easy for me to watch on my tablet on the ITV hub. So yeah, and again, love Jericho. So anything he does, and he seems to have complete free reign, whether it's dogs chasing drones or whatever. He has me either in stitches or on the edge of my seat all the time. So whatever he's doing, I sort of tend to follow a little bit as well.
The way he constantly keeps readapting and coming up with a new concept, Le Champion, he's phenomenal. I have greatest respect for Chris Jericho. Now, I know when we talked briefly, you actually said that you and your wife watch Ms. and Mrs.
Yes, we do, yeah.
The first few seasons of Total Divas, because I was kind of interested to see what it was like behind the scenes, and then they show the actual wrestling events, kind of like a year behind, I guess, or a year and a half behind, and it was kind of cool to watch that. I remember watching that one. So I guess the question is twofold. What is the appeal of Ms. and Mrs. from your perspective and your wife's perspective? And are there any other wrestling reality shows that you watch?
Well, I used to sort of, when I sort of dabbled, I've gone back and looked back through wrestling, because the year 2000 was when I got into it. So The Rock is my guy, the main guy to me, because I was Stone Cold Steve Austin was out injured a lot that year. So I went back through and I've watched a lot of old bits, especially when he came back and was inserted into that Miz John Cena feud, and I could not stand the Miz at all. Not in a good way either. I didn't want to watch him. But ever since that episode of Talking Smack, I know this is the same for a lot of people, he sort of found his groove, and I just find him such an enthralling character. And that was just on it was on one of our catch-up channels over here. Because Channel 5 have signed some sort of highlight deal with WWE, so they put a few of the other series on there. And my wife she'd actually asked me a couple of questions, because it's just one of those things that Facebook throws up to her time to time. Mm-hmm. Ms. and Maurice have done this, because she watches some other sort of reality TV and things like that. Nothing particularly wrestling, and she sort of seemed interested. So I tentatively said, "Do you want to watch an episode?" I was tentative about watching it. I was tentative about bringing her into something wrestling, but we sat down and it sort of covered both bases. It's a good old laugh for 20 minutes. It is 25 minutes. I can't really say what the appeal is other than the Miz. I just think he's really fun. I think he's really funny now, and whether it's being staged or not, it really doesn't matter to me, because his delivery is so good, and Maurice is so underrated as a performer as well. And the pair of them on screen is just it's just a joy for the pair of us, really.
Mm-hmm.
Made it sound like we're the biggest fans in the world there, haven't I think?
I don't
Which
think
we may be.
We're on our third season. I think this is the first time we've ever talked about Ms. and Mrs., to be honest.
You're so lucky. We've only got the end of series 1 at the moment, so we're waiting for them to drop some more episodes over here. So fingers crossed they'll be soon.
Wrestler we hinted at earlier was Bobby Lashley. So can you tell us more about your job and how you got to be in the position to interview Bobby?
Well, my job is to sort of report the sport as opposed to the sports entertainment. But before the Iron Serb came along to work with us as well, he has vastly superior wrestling knowledge to me. He does, as anyone would expect. I sort of had the chance to pick up wrestling interviews because I enjoy it, obviously, and a part of that was every 6 months in this pre-COVID world, we had WWE would come and visit Birmingham, bring their UK tour round, offer up review tickets, and usually an interview or two before the event happened. And Bobby Lashley was one of those, and I found him. So he surprised me in a way, as in how sort of engaging he was, because he doesn't always get to show that side of him. Because when he was in TNA, he always had MVP as his voice piece. WWE don't really seem to like him doing a lot of talking and that. And I don't really think we've seen the best of Bobby Lashley, apart from maybe the Braun Strowman feud, since he's come back into WWE. But it was absolute pleasure to interview him. We spoke He's probably the person I spoke to for the longest, and he couldn't be more sort of accommodating. Really, he's got a real passion for wrestling. We spoke a little bit about MMA as well, and quite a lot about sort of fitness and things. And he was just really happy to sort of go into details of his life and that really.
What format did the interview take? Was it in person or over the phone?
It was over the phone, unfortunately. I don't do too many in person. There was one that I got offered, which was Kane, which would, again, from someone who grew up through the year 2000, I would have loved to have gone and done, especially in person. It would have been as well. It clashed with something that I absolutely had to do that day, unfortunately. I cannot remember what it was, but it must have been. It really must have been important. But yeah, it was over the phone, and they said they sort of give you 10 minutes to chat to him. I think Bobby went well over. Really, he obviously found me okay to talk to. Not everybody does. It's all interviews are different, but it was great. I can't even remember what pay-per-view it was. It was obviously building up to that UK tour. I think he hadn't been back very long. And he spoke a lot about Brock Lesnar. Mm-hmm. He did, which is quite topical now as well, because he seems to have been tweeted about that again. And I remember coming off that interview, and I was absolutely convinced there was going to be some sort of octagon match between Lesnar and Lashley. Just the way he was talking, and everything just seemed to fit with what was going on at that time. Because I think it was Ken. I know it was Ken Shamrock, and I think it might have been Owen Hart, sort of back 99 time, did some sort of octagon looking match, and I thought it was going to be something they were going to do again. I even toyed with the idea, I think, in my piece, that potentially they might even do a full-on MMA fight if they could get it sanctioned somehow. I don't think that's going to happen, if I'm being honest, anymore. But they've got to do if they do have that match, they've got to do some sort of cage stipulation, surely.
Was it one or two interviews, as we saw May 2018 and August 2018 on your newspaper website?
It was the one interview, and we split it over a couple of editions. I think the one you probably saw in August probably talked a bit more about MMA and fitness, and we actually ran that in the sports section of the paper, which is rather unusual because, and I'm one of these people. It's sports entertainment. It has a different section in the paper, as it should, but we had lots of talk about MMA, lots of talk about fitness, and so and it was deemed worthy of the cut to make the sports pages, which I was, as a wrestling fan, is a very, very, very small victory for me. I enjoyed that one, and the May stuff, I think, was more the Lesnar building up to the UK tour. Obviously there's an element of there having to promote. You don't have to go sort of all bells and whistles saying, yeah, they're coming. Just mention it. And and building up to that. And I think he was pretty good on the tour as well. He certainly looks the part. He is. When you see these guys in person, it's as I'm sure you know, it's you suddenly realise just how sort of massive some of them are.
Now, we don't get that close for WWE because those tickets are ridiculously expensive. But the indie wrestling, we get wherever we can. But worst, we're probably like third row. And you can see just the bulk of those guys and the size and the muscle and all that thing. Yeah, very impressive indeed. Now, we know that Vince has a bit of a reputation of being a control freak. So I was kind of curious about the interview. So what literally happens during that 10 minutes then? Is that an open interview where you can ask any questions that you want? Is there a list of questions that you've been provided with so they can sort of get their agenda across, or is there any stipulations at all, or is it, like I said, is it literally an open interview?
It is literally an open interview, which was the first couple I did. I've done before. I've done one with Samoa Joe before. I've spoken to some of the WWE UK guys who are from round our way. That especially with people like Lashley, who are obviously coming back in to be big stars. I was surprised how open you're sort of allowed to be. Sometimes with interviews, people will say, oh, this and this are off limits. And depending on how important it is to that interview, may or may not agree to it. But never, ever had anything said to me in terms of you can't ask this, you can't ask that. I mean, the guys in WWE are obviously all really well media trained.
Sure.
So they're not going into this sort of completely wet behind the ears, and yeah, they were just happy to talk. They get some PR company who we link with here in the UK, who they put them out through and set the calls up. And yeah, it's sort of ask anything really. Be polite, obviously, as you would in any interviews. I'm sure you guys know in any where you'll find podcasts. But it's really is ask anything.
And I was curious because obviously, like you say, they're well trained, but we also know that the in-ring promos they do are heavily scripted as well. So I was kind of wondering that same thing, whether that extends out into the reporting side as well. Now, you've already talked quite a bit about the thing you talked about in that interview that you did, particularly on August 18th about MMA. There was a couple of things in there that really got my attention. I think I actually already asked you this question, Mason, so you're probably going to get the correct answer. He talked about wanting to fight until he was 50 or 60 years old, which totally blew my mind away. And we interviewed a wrestler, and I think he said he wanted to go until he was 70. And it just seems you can keep going longer and longer. Obviously, Undertaker's doing pretty good, mid-50s. How old do you think Bobby is? Or can you remember? Yeah, can you remember what you first said, Dan?
I think I said like 35.
35. Derek, do you know how old he is?
I'm almost certain he's in his 40s. Because I'm sort of 42. I'm going to go 42.
He's 44 years old.
Oh, I
was like, oh my gosh. Like, you've seen, obviously, Brock Lesnar's really kept his physique, and obviously a similar position. Obviously, they're both MMA fighters, but 44 years old, I don't doubt for 1 second now that he could fight until he's 50. I was genuinely shocked. I thought he was late 30s, possibly like 40, because we know there's a few And we also found out he shares his birthday with Mommy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So July 16th we found out. But yeah, when you interviewed him, he was 42. Because that was actually...
That's what I remember. That's my get out.
I was like, surely that can't be right, because this was 2 years ago. So I went and looked. Sure enough, he was 44. Now, I think you might have already answered this question, but go ahead, Mason.
What do you remember most when you spoke to Bobby?
To Bobby, it would. Do you know what? It was that Lesnar. It was the Lesnar stuff. Really, it was coming out with that feeling that that match was gonna take place and take place soon. And to be honest, it's a bit disappointing to be 2 years down the line and that match hasn't taken place, because they like putting sort of the big behemoths together, and there's probably no two better sort of big men who can move well than Lesnar and Lashley in that. And to be honest, they got out the gate with that one. You know, we could be sat here now talking about Lashley as a much bigger star than he's been over the last couple of years. And I would love to see him just be allowed to talk like himself more, because talking to him was so different compared to how you see him scripted. I don't think it was too far removed from the infamous Sisters promo with his feud with Sami Zayn, and it was so chalk and cheese. I can't remember which came first, my interview or that promo, but I remember watching that and thinking, these two guys are so different, and I know which one I want to watch and talk and engage with more. And it was the one I was talking on the phone to, because he was so passionate about so many different things. He's passionate about sport. He's passionate about fitness. He's passionate about wrestling. And yeah, so then to see things like that, I know this is the way, and things that and their storylines need to be created in different ways. But I feel like Bobby's passion, if they tapped into that, and it's not just Bobby Lashley, if you tap into whoever it is, if you tap into their passion, what they're passionate about, it's like you look at Matt Hardy in his career sort of renaissance. He's obviously sort of passionate about that sort of, almost sort of Phantom of the Opera side, it feels like, on a much grander scale. And you can feel it come across. You can feel it come through the screen. So it doesn't matter if on paper the subject doesn't sound quite as engaging. That performer will then elevate that so far greatly. And yeah, I'd love to see people like Bobby just given not a complete free rein. I know that can't happen, but just what are you passionate about, Bobby? And then get him to go from there.
I think a similar thing with Dean Ambrose. I know when he left WWE, he was very vocal, and now he's John Moxley. He gets a lot more freedom, and obviously he seems a lot happier of being able to do that as well. I know he hated that when he was in WWE. I also wondered the same thing as you were talking. Brock, we never really get to hear either, because we always have Paul Heyman's voice. I wondered a similar thing. I wonder what Brock's real character's like as well. I wonder if he's like that Bobby Lashley that you spoke about when you actually engage with him one-on-one, what he's actually like. Now, the thing I actually took from the interview, I read through all your interviews because they're all online. We'll post a link as well if anyone wants to go back and check through them. The comment I took the most from was this. He talked about the differences between MMA and wrestling. And he said, quote, "My style is basically the same. I hit as hard in wrestling as I do in MMA," end quote. I was like, oh my gosh, the people who were in the ring with him, I don't think they would appreciate that necessarily. But I was like, whoa, that one absolutely shocked me. Now, one of the other things that I saw, I think you alluded to this, but I think I actually took this from an article in Colorado. Let's see what we got here. He was a top amateur wrestler, which we obviously realized as well. He was winning the International Military Sports Council gold and silver during his 3 years with the U.S. Army, and he was hopeful of reaching the 2004 Olympic Games until he was caught up in a robbery during a routine trip to the bank in 2003. "The guy kicked the door down and shot me," said Lashley, recalled of the robbery attempt in the Denver Post 2 years ago. "I took a dive to the ground, landed on my knee, split my knee wide open, and I had to go to surgery afterwards. It was a crazy situation, and it ended my amateur wrestling career." Whew, I hadn't heard any of that story before. I think that was quoted from you, and then I think I went and read the original Denver Post article as well. And then he went on to talk about how a former amateur wrestler, Kurt Angle, saw him as well, saw something in him, and that ended up with him being in the WWE. But that could have gone totally opposite. Like I said, if it ended his collegiate career, you would think that could have easily ended his wrestling career as well.
We know that Kurt Angle is one of your favorite wrestlers. With him retiring, which current wrestlers do you like and why?
The phenomenal one.
It's
got to be. He's my part of the. He. When I got back into TNA, it was AJ and the early adaptation of the character you see now. When you saw AJ turn from the sort of the clean shaven, clean cut guy who carried TNA on his back. I think it was towards the end of that Aces and Eights storyline where he came out, his hair was slightly longer, he was less shaven, and that was sort of the start of the turn of his character that went through New Japan. So I followed him sort of all through that. He's just wonderful to watch in the ring, and he's been superb on the mic and all the supposed weaker parts of his game as well. I do enjoy a bit of NXT as well. Undisputed Era, you know. Why they're not already headlining WrestleMania is beyond me, because they're just all four guys are just absolutely incredible. Maybe it suits them, I don't know, but I'm trying to think in AEW. I find it hard for AEW as well, because I'm still there's a few guys there, like I've heard all the stories of Kenny Omega and that, but never really watched his matches. And I've got a friend who I work with who was big into it, New Japan, and he was telling me all about Kenny Omega and all his matches, and he sort of showed me some highlights and things. I've been really looking forward to seeing more of him. I don't really feel like we've had a chance to sort of build his character up into one of those big time matches yet. So I'm waiting for that, but I feel like there's something there. But yeah, I still love all the old. I call them the old. I nearly called them the old guys, which would have them all hunting me down in Wolverhampton. I love the Jerichos. I'd love Hardy to have another really good. Jeff Hardy to have another really good run. Matt Hardy's renaissance has been brilliant. I'm absolutely devastated. Kurt Angle's now retired, because even towards the end of his TNA run, I thought he could still go with the absolute best of them. But yeah, the sort of the Undisputed Era, AJ Styles, these are the guys. I've probably forgotten loads. I had them all listed in my head before I come on, and I've completely lost them out of my mind. But yeah, I mean, there's so many good guys.
Sure.
You look back to 2000 when I first got into it. There was you were picking from a much smaller pool as to who your favourite wrestlers could be, because there was really WCW was starting to be on the wane. WWE had your Takers, your Stone Cold, your Rocks, So you were sort of picking from that. But now there's so many excellent companies, so many, you think there's 3 brands within WWE alone, all have got fantastic performers. Buddy Murphy, that's the one I was racking my brains. Loved Buddy Murphy. Yep. When him and Rollins finally break up, that's going to be a main event to behold, I think. But yeah, there's so many talented guys out there.
Isn't that great though? When you're struggling and there's so many.
Oh, I know exactly.
Famous one because there's so many. That's awesome when that happens. Now I got to talk about my worst Kurt Angle moment. I was actually at the WrestleMania where it was his final match and against Baron Corbin, and you're like, well, obviously Kurt Angle's going to go over. It's like his finishing thing. Everybody hates Baron Corbin. They let Baron Corbin win. I will never understand the booking of that. They were like, boo! That was probably about the only result I didn't like at WrestleMania. All the other ones I was quite happy with. They were very crowd-friendly. They put Kofi over. They put the Iconics over. They even let, Kurt Hawkins win after like 200 matches in a row. But they couldn't let Kurt Angle win that one. I thought that one was really tough. Yeah, Kenny Omega, I think he's definitely interesting, depending on, if you've only watched AEW, you wouldn't really think much of him. If you're aware of New Japan, you know that he's far better than that. And I think they're trying to transition him in rather than put him in as a big star straight away. But yeah, I think that's certainly going to be interesting how his character develops.
That's where I feel like AEW was sort of between a rock and a hard place when it started. Yep. Because if it wanted to come out the gate with its big stars, then it was going to get the criticism for, oh, look at you, you're pushing Cody, you're pushing the Bucks, you're pushing Kenny Omega. But instead, they're now in this place where people who have only just come and watched at AEW aren't seeing their best guys in the top position on the card. So they're in that different place. So I mean, to be fair to them, there was clearly no real winner there. I think the only one they've probably got absolutely on the mark is Cody, who is such a again I probably should mention Cody among my current favourite, because it's just it's not, whereas AJ Styles, it's his actual ability, his ability in the ring. Cody's obviously got bundles and bundles of ability, and I went back and watched his match with Dustin Rhodes from All Out, All In. Can't remember which one, but the very memorable match with Dustin Rhodes anyway. Yeah. And there was hardly anything really, and there was any particular moves in that match that just made you go wow. But the emotion of his storytelling is just incredible. But yeah, he feels like the only one they've got absolutely sort of spot on at the moment, positioned him nicely in the card. He's doing big match after big match, but I want to see a bit more from the Bucks, a bit more from Kenny Omega.
We know you were at some of the WWE events in Birmingham. Do you get tickets as a reporter? Do you go to these events and you have to buy your own ticket?
Now, you kind of answered that a little bit earlier, so I think I know. So the question is, how good are your seats then? On how many seats do you get? Is it just for you, or can you take like a family member along?
I can take. Usually, is me and my friend from the sports desk who go along. But I've been able to get tickets. But sometimes I can take my brother. It generally depends how well it is sold. They'll give you 2 or 3 tickets. They will, and then no money has to exchange hands. And I can review the show, and they don't specify it has to be a good write up, bad write up. I always try to be sort of balanced in what I write about. If there was a bad match or there was something that didn't really work on the card, I'll make sure I say. But equally, if there was something brilliant on the card, then make sure I sort of tell everybody about it. And they're really good at the house shows, as WWE would call them, the live events. They know all their cities. They know who the sports teams to boo and the sports teams, so they get Elias out there, and they know who whatever sports team he says, they know exactly. And you think who the crowd are going to boo him for, and you think he does that every night on a 2-week tour in the UK, which is a market they don't really know. They probably don't really know soccer as it is over there particularly well, but they get that all those little bits. They get absolutely spot on. And we've had some brilliant moments in Birmingham. My favourite moment involves Kurt Angle as well, because it was when he joined up with the Shield. He became Shield Dad. as he was known very briefly. And I remember walking in and I think my wife had texted me because she'd seen it drop down on her Facebook feed that Kurt Angle was going to be that. And she says, "Oh, do you know," because she knows how much I love Kurt Angle, "do you know Kurt Angle's wrestling tonight?" I was like, she's having me on here. She's having me on. So I went through and I could not get to my seat quick enough. He obviously wasn't going to be the first match on, but
Yeah.
I would not move for the toilet, for a drink, for a snack, anything. There was nothing moving me. Just in case it was a very brief cameo appearance, I was not going to miss it. And we were very lucky in Birmingham. So I think that whole tour they did really well because they had a lot of illness and injuries at the time. I know Triple H joined in with the Shield and a couple of other events that one. So even though that's a one-off show there's probably 8,000 people there, which is quite small in there, sort of the grand scheme of things. For them, it's no billion-dollar TV deal. They made sure that they sort of really respect to the fans because I went along really looking forward to seeing the Shield. They took that away. They didn't just take it for granted that I was going to walk away. I'll be happy that I saw 2/3 of them anyway. They made sure to give something special. And I love it. The seats are better than I could afford, shall we say?
Better than if you were paying yourself. That would make
exactly
sense.
Yeah.
Now, you kind of already answered this one. I looked at different ones that you've been to because obviously I see your write-up afterwards as well. So I was going to ask you what was your favorite one. So you already answered that one. The other one I was curious because I could put it between two. Obviously, we're big Shield fans. Mason's huge Roman Reigns fan. I'm a big John Moxley, Dean Ambrose fan. I like Seth as well. The Shield probably got us back into wrestling. Now, one of the other ones I did see, and perhaps you weren't at this one then, November 2008, Rey Mysterio, Jeff Hardy, Daniel Bryan all returned after years. Also on that card was AJ Styles versus Samoa Joe, Becky versus Charlotte in a double main event. Man, you have some good matches there. Is there any other moments you can think of from when it sounds like you're being spoiled, actually, a little bit.
That one was pretty good, to be fair. I mean, that one, you knew that one was going to be good even before you sat down because you could just see, I'd never seen Daniel Bryan before, so getting to see him for the first time was superb. I had never seen Jeff Hardy before that day, and I absolutely love Jeff Hardy, and I again hadn't seen it, and I think he was working a little bit hurt at the time, so we didn't get to see him do the Swanton, but. What was great about watching him and Rey Mysterio, and what some of the other guys don't do, is they were on just before the interval, and they had only just left signing autographs and having pictures at the end of the interval. I mean, they were there for 20 minutes. They were superb. I mean, some of the other guys don't seem like they can get out of there quick enough, and these are the baby faces we're talking about. It's supposed to be celebrating with the crowd. But like Ray and Jeff Hardy are they were superb with all the fans down the front row, and I don't think they could have missed anybody who could get anywhere near them that day. I thought that was brilliant. I remember the first review I went to do involved it was at the height of the sort of the James Ellsworth era, shall we call it? Very mini era, I know, but so we saw AJ versus Ambrose with Ellsworth involved. Then that was really interesting. It was interesting to watch AJ work heel, which was the first time I'd seen him do that. It's the first time I'd seen him live, full stop. But to see him work heel up in person, and that he had all the little quirks, despite watching him as a face all those years in TNA. Ambrose was on such a roll at that time. He was, and Ellsworth was just I don't know how he blew up, but it was he was absolutely he was phenomenal as well. And I mean that's the loudest chant I can remember was the whole arena just chanting Ellsworth, Ellsworth. And it's like, we got these big stars here, and everyone was just absolutely mad for James Ellsworth.
The area you live in has some big name wrestlers that people who watch NXT would know, such as Pete Dunne, Tyler Bate, and Trent Seven. I think you had a chance to interview those guys too. What do you remember about that?
Yeah, I remember I had a chance. I was supposed to interview all three, actually. I'm not sure what happened with the Tyler interview. I entered those three, and I interviewed a a couple of the other guys who were sort of early exits in the original WWE UK tournament, and we've sort of never really heard from again. But I absolutely love talking to Trent. I don't know Trent well enough to go up to him and say hello, but I see him walking around the supermarket from time to time here in Wolverhampton, and I remember talking to him, and because his story is great, because that's what he is. He's just a bog standard, normal Wolverhampton bloke. He is, and he got into wrestling really late, and he is just so happy, to have got where he's got, and he's done it in such a short amount of time. And I absolutely love talking to Trent. I did that time. He is such an engaging personality. One of those that you could just give him a microphone and you don't need to worry what's gonna happen. You know he's going to entertain the crowd and get people on side. Be interesting to see him work as a heel as well. I reckon he's got the gift of that inside him as well. But he is such an engaging person. And Pete Dunne never broke character once when I interviewed him. This is the thing with wrestling interviews you may have found on your podcast. Because I don't do many of them, I always have the difficulty. Is this one going to be in kayfabe, or is this one going to be just with, like it was Bobby Lashley the person? But It very much was Pete Dunne, the wrestler. He was his, and he was. You spoke to him, and you just knew he was going to be. You knew he was going to be a big star because he's got that attitude. It wasn't. You knew you knew what you were in for on my side of the interview. It wasn't like I think, this guy's being a jerk. I'm just gonna wrap this one up and move on to the next one, because I think I had 3 or 4 that day, and he was getting his point across, but he was doing in that sort of snarling sort of way that he might just jump down the phone line and put me in an ankle lock or something at any moment. He could tell he's going to be a big star. I think he's going to the very top.
I'm going to say, whenever he's appeared on NXT, he always seems to go down very well. He definitely has all the characteristics. He has the good wrestling ability. He's obviously got the microphone work as well. I think he's a complete package. He's still young enough that he can make it. But I think obviously right now with COVID, that's obviously been a bit of a problem, that you can't give him that push right now because of the travel issues. I think if I lived in Wolverhampton and I shopped at the same place that you shop at, Derek, I'd be wearing a Trent Seven shirt. Every time I go grocery shopping, I'd be wearing that shirt. And then just as you bump, look, it's Trent Seven. Hey, look, Trent, I'm wearing your shirt. That would be so hard to avoid not to do.
Just walk past us going, with a little moustache. It's very, very hard not to. I try to maintain some level of professionalism. It doesn't always work, but I let him crack on with his shopping. I try not to appear in his trolley too much when he's buying.
What's annoying for me is if I wear a wrestler shirt the day before I randomly see them in public.
Oh yeah.
Oh no. Which other wrestlers have you interviewed?
I think I've mentioned pretty much all of it. Oh, Samoa. I think Samoa Joe as well was, I believe, was my first wrestling interview, and again, just one of those. It's just one of those from when I got back into wrestling through TNA. He's a great guy, a great, really engaging talker, and one of those you feel like. I think with Samoa Joe, I think it hasn't happened for him just because he's picked up little injuries at the wrong moments. But I'm absolutely desperate for him to do well, and he's considered everything. He's made such a big success of himself. He's clearly really highly thought of, because you don't get to be on commentary and shouted at down the earpiece by Vince unless you're really well respected. So. He's done really well for himself in that respect. Again, great guy. There's none of them I've really spoke to. I've come away thinking I don't really want to interview again, or I didn't really like you. Maybe that's just because I try and get on with everyone. I don't know, but Samoa Joe, absolutely, top guy.
Now, one of the quotes from that interview that you did with him, he said, "I've been coming to the UK for the better part of 15 years. When you talk about the UK scene, you talk about a fan base that is very supportive. You'll be hard-pressed to find a fan base as passionate. From Birmingham, London, Manchester, up to Scotland, you have all these pockets of fans who vehemently support the wrestlers they love, and it's always fun." My kind of question to you then is, we're obviously in the States now. I didn't used to go to pay-per-view events at all when I was in England. How would you contrast the fan base from England in relation to the US? And following on from that as well, do you stay up till silly AM to watch the pay-per-views? Like, do you stay up? I know some people will stay up until like 5 AM in the morning in England just so they can watch the end of WrestleMania.
I'll answer your second bit first. If I feel like something big is going to go down, I will sit there and I'll watch it live because I want to be part of it. Like that, particularly, it was the WrestleMania where the Hardys returned. And my wife's like, "Oh, come on, you should go to. You've watched the first couple. We watched the kickoff. We watched the opening match." I'm like, "I feel like something's happening here," and I've got to see it through. And then by that point, it was 3:30 in the morning. I was like, "I'll just see it through I'll see it through the last couple of matches now." Forgetting there was still 6 matches left on the card, and it was basically breakfast time by the time I finally went to bed. So yeah, I've got a little little kids, so I've got to make sure I'm up to feed them and that. So I can't do it every 4 weeks, but for the WrestleMania, Royal Rumble are the two that will usually get me because I love the Royal Rumble. But yeah, it is hard work to stay up that late sometimes, particularly when you get bogged down through the middle of a card. But if I'm up that late, I know I've got that anticipation that something's coming, so I can usually eat enough cereal in the middle of the night to give me the energy to get through to 5 o'clock. It's hard to compare or contrast to America, but in the UK, there is, I would say, if they bought a WrestleMania or a SummerSlam back over here, it would sell out in 20 minutes, if that. It would, and that we're not talking a 20,000 arena. We're talking Wembley Stadium, or Old Trafford in Manchester. Excuse me. It would sell in 20 minutes. I mean, I know I'd be straight on the phone or the internet in the morning to get myself a ticket because people here are just so desperate for something, for it to succeed and be part of something. I think maybe we're just slightly over the hump in terms of absolute peak of where it was, but there's something bubbling there where there could be another peak of wrestling fandom. When TNA was around that sort of 2011 time, was so much more successful in the UK than it was. I mean, they were selling out the SSE Hydro in Glasgow, which is sort of 12,000 people, for just for a house show. I mean, WWE couldn't do that at that time. I feel like I'm waiting for one of the big, what is now the big two, to really secure it. If someone could secure a deal that had wrestling on at a decent hour, it's probably going to be pre-recorded, especially if it's taking place on the other side of the Atlantic. But if someone can get if AEW could get their show in about, even 9-10 o'clock on a Wednesday, Thursday night, then there'd be such a swell of support for it. But beyond that, I mean, the independent scene, I mean, we're in Wolverhampton. Trent owns Fight Club Pro, which I've not been down to yet, which is really bad of me because it looks an absolute blast. And there's so many promotions. There's been loads of documentaries like about ICW up in Scotland, which is how Grado made his name. And there just seems to be promotions everywhere, particularly sort of through the north into Scotland as well. And there's a couple down. There's some down in London as well. It's just there's little pockets. I feel like there's something that could come together to unite everybody as well. But it hasn't happened yet, quite. But we keep our fingers crossed. SummerSlam 2021. That's the one.
We'd better mention Wolfram Pro Wrestling as well, or somebody 25 feet away over your shoulder.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I'll be straight in a...
next time as well. So we always like to give them a shout out as well whenever possible.
He's not even here. I can feel him coming up behind me now. Well, that's what I meant to say was Wolfram Pro Wrestling, of course.
Obviously, as a sports reporter, most of your reporting is not wrestling. What stories do you have to share from outside wrestling?
I would say being a sports reporter or being a wrestling reporter, it feels like the greatest, to me, is the greatest job in the world. I knew very early on that, as Graham would attest to, that I was never going to make it as a football player in any sort of level. So, the next best thing was always being at the event, watching alongside, having the best seat in the house, and then getting to sort of share in that after. And I've sort of built up from covering small non-league teams, watched them have great FA Cup runs. So you get really to sort of know people. It doesn't matter if someone plays in the Midland League Division 3 or in the Premier League. Everybody has their own story, and it's really the great thing when I was I still covered non-league football as well to an extent. You get to feel more of people's stories. You do, because you get to spend more time with them, have more interviews with them, and I love that as well. And then you get to share in their success a little bit as well. I remember spending late nights in the pub after a cup win with the team, enjoying that. That's brilliant. But sort of the real highlights of as being a sports reporter, as I was fortunate enough to go along and cover the 2012 Paralympics. I was in the stadium when one of Britain's Richard, I've forgotten his last name. Goodness me. The roar around the stadium as he came round, and I went, and then just suddenly thought, my goodness me, I was there for what was one of the greatest sporting moments of that year. That was so fantastic. And again, I was really there to cover a bit of Paralympic wheelchair basketball, because I'd covered from my early days living in Haverhill, Suffolk. I covered a lady called Caroline McLean, and she was one of my very first sports interviews, and I got to go and watch her in the Paralympics and then interview after, and that was a great moment, because so she sort of became a sort of a friend over time, and it was wonderful then to go and experience that with her. So I was, the next best seat in the house behind actually participating. But yeah, being a sports reporter is wonderful. I've covered Premier League football, the FA Cup final. I've been to Wimbledon. I will never go to Wimbledon again and not be disappointed, because a press ticket at Wimbledon that's one of the events where the press ticket is far superior to anything anyone pays, because I could literally walk out of centre court over onto court 1, then back into centre because I fancy the set of that match, then over to court 18 where one of the juniors I was covering was playing, and it was, well, I think I saw Murray, Federer, Nadal all in the space of about 4 hours. That was at tennis. I was actually good at tennis as opposed to just very mediocre at football. So that was wonderful to watch, and the British Grand Prix as well. I love Formula One, and so that's probably one of the more underwhelming events to cover, because you sort of get not locked, but you get put in a room with all the statistics sort of around you. So unless you have to try really hard to go and find somewhere to sort of catch the action, sort of perch yourself up on a hill somewhere where you can't really feel what's going on in the whole race. But again, not complaining, because it's phenomenal watching them come past at 200 mile an hour, and it is the best job in the world, really. And I don't go out so much anymore. I'm more of a desk monkey now, but I try and make everyone else's copy look good as it comes in, or more they make me look good by sending me good stories. But it's brilliant. In Wolverhampton at the moment, Wolverhampton Wanderers, the football team, are doing fantastic. We also cover West Bromwich Albion, who've just been promoted back into the Premier League. So I've got that to look forward to next year for the first time, because that's a really fierce derby game. I saw Aston Villa in the FA Cup final. Actually went out and physically reported on that with one of my colleagues, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful job.
That's a pretty impressive resume. Like, of all major events you could think of, if you wrote a list of them down, you pretty much covered them all. Go ahead, Mason.
How has COVID changed your job with less sporting events these last few months?
Yeah, we had 3 months there where we were we didn't have much to fill the paper with. I'll be honest, but I'm very blessed to work with a real fantastic team of writers who have all got their own individual fantastic ideas, and we all clubbed together as a team and came up with these ideas to sort of get us through. It wasn't just, there was bits of nostalgia. We always get interviews because it was really interesting to find out what people were doing. You know, for a Premier League footballer, it would be wake up, go training, come home, kill a few hours, go back to sleep again, repeat all the next day before we got to match day. But it was really people's stories changed. So in some ways, it created stories for us that we're able to find out, and it actually became it's become more pleasant to speak to people as well. You know, it's a horrible situation. I'm not trying to say it's a good situation at all, but everyone has a common ground. All of a sudden, everyone's thrust into a common ground, and I think that helped people realise, because there's always been a lot of tension on. I'm in a job where there is just generally a lot of tension because we don't always write things that people like, and it's not always our intention. Never our intention, particularly to upset someone, particularly in the sporting sense. I don't go into work any day thinking I'm going to write a bad thing about X player or Y player today. But I think some people have previously been burnt by the media, you know, and have rightfully feel wary of it. But it gave everybody a common ground. It did, and I felt it brought everyone close together. I got to pick up a couple of more interviews as well with some of our local motorsport drivers and Olympians, and everyone's first question, how are you? And in 15 years of doing sports reporting, I could probably count the number of people on my fingers and toes as to who have asked how I am in that day. And I don't need people to ask how I am, because generally I'm doing okay. But it made me realise that everyone suddenly had common ground, and we should try and keep that. Probably sounded a bit preachy there. Well, not my intention at all. But
what advice would you give to someone my age looking to get a career in journalism? Just
persevere. Mason, I'd say you're already doing more than any other 12-year-old. So just keep. I was always told, keep persevering. As long as you're staying, it's been lovely to talk to you. You're very polite. As long as you maintain that, no one will ever think that you're bugging them. So don't be afraid to ask the extra question. And it's just journalism or podcasting, interviewing, it all sort of falls under the same thing. It's all about sort of tenacity. Just plug away, because people will open doors that way then. Because that's what, particularly in journalism, that's what people want to see. If I've got a reporter who wants to come and work on our desk, I want to know that they're not going to turn around and walk away the first time someone says, sorry, not doing that interview, or sorry, that I want to know that they're going to find a different way, try and find a different way that they can approach the subject and get that interview. Because, it's not about just knocking on someone's door 30 times a day, because that's not the way to do it at all. It's about, okay, so this person said no. How can I approach it so that they'll say yes? What can I say to them? What can I offer to them so that they'll say yes? So, it's perseverance is the main one. But you've probably done more interviews this year than I have, because, like I say, I just make other people make me look good, and I make them look good now. So you're doing well, mate.
How can we find you and your newspapers on social media?
You can find us on social media through. We do a lot of tweeting. It's at Express and Star, and I also work for the Shropshire Star as well, which is at Shropshire Star. And you can also find us by searching for us on Facebook. And my own Twitter handle, should anyone be bothered, I do tweet about wrestling, rarely, but I do tweet. I know a couple of the other local guys as well. We've got someone who works on our patch for Kid Events to Harry as Matt Paddock. He does a lot of tweeting about wrestling because he writes for some of the national papers over here. But you can find me as Derek Bish _star. I'm sure there's an underscore in there now. Yeah, that's the one. Is that Derek Bish?
We'll fact check that one. And we'll make
I'm sure that's right.
Notes that it's good. Now, the last question, and it could split into two questions. When we were setting this interview up, you did jokingly say we could also talk about maths. We could also talk about our football careers as well. Now, if you want to do that, you can. You can either ask me a question or you can reminisce about what you like. I want you to tell me the story, though, because this was after we'd finished talking. You were like, I think you left at this point. I want you to talk about probably the most memorable game in Wake's history.
Yes. You insist you left. I until I see a team sheet from that day, I will always I refuse to be. I refuse to believe it.
You told me the date, and you said it was the World Cup, the Rugby Union World Cup final, and England won. And I said I know exactly where I was. I was in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I was with a fellow exchange teacher from Australia, and we were watching the game live. So I wasn't even in the country at this point. So I'm safe from.
Well, it was, the game you referred to. I mean, we didn't have many particular highs in terms of results when we were playing together for Wake's Reserves, but this was probably a particular. Do you know what? It was a low for a bit, but probably about 20 minutes in the middle of the game. But ever since then, I've embraced it, and it was a 29-0 defeat. Which is pretty impressive in rugby, as it was on that day. A rugby game, as the World Cup final was on that day, but for an actual football game is And even better was I was the goalkeeper, and as a budding young journalist, also I'd done a lot of work experience at the local paper, which is the Isle of Wight County Press. So unfortunately, the sports editor John Hannam knew exactly who was playing in goal for Wake's Reserves that day. He didn't even need to look at the team sheet. He knew it would be me. But what he didn't know was at 25-0, I was given some blessed relief and actually came out onto the pitch and came the closest we came to scoring all day, which is by hitting the post towards the end of that game. But it was one of those cup games that probably should have just been declared a walkover. We should have all gone to the pub. But there we go. I mean, Ventnor were just a really good side. I think they'd reformed in the bottom division. Hence, we'd been drawn against them in the cup. The Rugby World Cup final was on in the morning, our time. So the 7 players that did turn up, I think pretty much all of them had been in the pub watching it, as well as another 3 or 4 or 5 who didn't turn up because they just continued celebrating. And I was 17 at the time. So I'd just been innocently playing tennis while watching the partly playing tennis, partly watching the World Cup final in the morning. Little did I know how the afternoon would change my life, and I can't escape it either. I know the date. I know the date every year when it comes up. Oh, it's so now this year will be 17 years since England won the Rugby World Cup. I will know it's 17 years since I lost 29-0 in a football game, which is just joyous. It's joyous to be reminded. Luckily, I've learned to embrace it.
It's almost on par with a story I remember reading in the Guinness Book of Records when I was probably younger than Mason. Arbroath versus Bonaccord, and I think that was like 42-0. It's like the biggest defeat ever. And kind of under similar circumstances, I think the cricket team turned up instead of the actual football team, which is why they... But when you told me that score, like, I've had some bad results from school football. I remember 10-0. I remember 13-0. I think that was as bad. They stick with you, but 29-0 was pretty special. I'm so glad you mentioned that because I had no idea on that story at all.
Well,
that's beautiful.
The worst thing was it was because I was in the 6th form by that point, so it was a sort of 18th birthday party year. So I went to someone else's 18th birthday party that evening with all my school friends, none of who played that day, none of who played in the same team. We had a couple who did play, but they'd gone promoted to the first team by that point, with me stuck down in the reserve still. But I remember getting on a coach to take us to this party, and everybody on the coach knew that I'd lost by that many that day already, and I had no idea how, because this was it wouldn't have been straight up on the website that afternoon. Because this is 2003. This is ancient history, I bet to you, Mason. But everybody knew. And the worst thing, everyone thought it was 31-0, including me. I thought it was 31 at that point. I was convinced we'd conceded 31 that day. So when it came around to 29 the week up, when it was in the paper officially, it was 29. I was like, it's all right. Could have been worse.
All right, I want to share my week's moment with you as well. I think I've told this to Mason. There was one training session where everyone sort of just warms up by themselves. Everyone brings a ball. Everyone's sort of doing keepy-ups or juggling, as they call it over here. And I was no different. I was doing this. I was keeping up. I think my best at the time was probably about 500. And I was doing the juggling, and then everyone starts to form in a group, and then coach calls over, and he's like, I don't know what he called me then, Graham, back, whatever he called me. And I was about 500 at that point. I was like, there is no way I'm stopping at this point. And I just kept going. And then finally, the session started without me. I got up to 600, 700, 750 was the final. I'm glad it stopped at 750 because it was an easy number to remember. The ball dropped to the ground. I went and joined with you, and straight away, coach is like, yeah, go ahead, 2 laps of the track, or 2 laps of the field. I had to run. I knew I was going to get. I was like, there is no way I'm stopping at 500. I don't think I've ever come close to that since. I think probably 100 might be the most I've ever done since that event. That will always stick in my mind. I was like, yeah, there's no way I'm stopping at this point.
We obviously, we were all great jugglers. Clearly, that was our problem. It was kicking the ball forwards to the other goal. That's where we went wrong.
It's not related to skill, unfortunately. It's totally useless. Derek, thank you so much for your time today. We've gone way over an hour. That was so cool to pick your brain on wrestling, talk about Bobby Lashley, and catch up on some of those beautiful moments from Wakes football.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks. It's nice to see you again, Graham, and nice to meet you, Mason, over the Skype for the first time. Been following your podcast, so keep up the good work, mate. It's really good.
It's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from them.
Goodbye.
Music was Zigzag by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. Licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0. http://creativecommons.org/licenses/by/3.0